To our third spotlight screening of Suppress and Sabotage the Fight to Vote. My name is Carmen Samuel, and I'm the screenings program manager here at Brave New Films. And Brave New Films is a nonprofit film company founded by Robert Greenwald with a mission to create media that makes an impact. We are here to educate, empower, and empower viewers to take action on issues that matter the most. Brave New Films is hosting spotlight screenings for a deeper dive that centers specific states with new voting laws enacted in the past 2 years. Today's spotlight is on Arizona. And following the film, we'll be talking with some of Arizona's most influential voting rights advocacy groups. And today we have Reginald Boulding, who is the Arizona House Democratic leader and co-founder of Arizona Coalition for Change, who will be joining us after the screening. And we have Gabriela Cazares Kelly, who is the Pima County recorder. And we have Avery Zola, who is the voter education manager for Arizona Citizens Clean Elections Commission. And a very special guest this particular go around, we have a moderator who by Vicki Lori Williams, who is the campus business manager and Phoenix College Networks liaison for American Express. So without further ado, I'd like for you all to take a look at your screens and hear a message from our founder, president, and award-winning producer, Robert Greenwald.
Hello, I'm Robert Greenwald from Brave New Films. I'd like to welcome everybody for our spotlight screening, and I'd like to thank the Arizona Coalition for Change taking the lead as a partner in making this screening happen today. Working on this film over the last year, or 2 years actually, has been a challenge in many ways, and most importantly, it's been a challenge to tell the stories of real people, of Americans, of patriots who are being denied the right to vote, whose vote is being suppressed, whose vote is being sabotaged, whose vote is being stopped. The film is a tool, and it's a tool that we give to all of you to use, to screen, to energize, to activate, to motivate, and to get people to take action. Whoever thought in this year, so many years after the initial battles for civil rights, the initial battles for voting, whoever thought we'd be locked into struggles again of so sad, so painful, and so similar to the fights that were fought years and years ago. Lives were given. And now it's up to all of us. It's up to all of us to say no. We're not going to accept this. No, we're not going to be silent. And yes, we're going to do something. And the yes is this film, thanks to our generous funders and supporters and foundations and individuals, thousands of whom give us dollars so that we can make this film free. The film is available with study guides. The film is available with reflection guides. It can be shown at your home, to your neighbors, at your schools, at your workplaces. Always, always free. Always, always a tool for activating, a tool for doing, a tool for making things happen. It definitely takes a village for social change. It definitely takes a village for justice. It definitely takes a village with all of us working together, fighting the good fight, standing up and saying, no, we will not be silent. We will not accept this. We will make sure that everyone across this entire country has the right to vote.
They do not want this Black woman to vote.
My state doesn't want people like me to vote.
Florida does not want my voice heard.
They don't want my community to vote and win.
I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Voter suppression and race is as intertwined as anything in our country. The fight that Black people have had to be full citizens in this country to have a voice and a vote.
We've seen this over the history of our country. People of color, black people, have had to fight for their vote. You think about this experiment in self-government, one person, one vote. But we've always had to fight for it. Here we are again, fighting for what's basic.
We're now in a major election year with the 2022 midterms this fall. But before voters head to the polls, state legislatures may be changing how you vote.
Driven by the big lie, driven by Donald Trump's claims of a stolen election, we see states across the country passing laws that make it harder for some people to vote.
This is the #1 continuing threat to American democracy.
If you want to understand how voter suppression can actually impact the outcome of the election, just go back to 2018 in Georgia in the governor's race between Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams.
Georgia's tight race for governor is getting national attention.
Brian Kemp is not only the Republican gubernatorial nominee, he's Georgia's Secretary of State.
Stacey Abrams looking to make history by becoming the nation's first female African-American governor.
Volunteers are picking up phones and knocking on doors across the state.
Come in and register to vote.
We are very excited to register as many people as we possibly can.
What do we want?
Register to vote!
When do we want it?
Today!
I come as one, but I stand as 10,000.
Pull back that veneer. And you see something really rotten happening. It's almost like termites coming in. They're in the wood. They're eating the wood away. And you don't even realize your house is getting ready to collapse until it's almost too late. We've got to understand, this isn't a Klan cross burning. This stuff is very bureaucratic, it's very mundane, it's very routine, but it is lethal.
My name is Bobby Jenkins. I live in Cuthbert, Georgia. The county is Randolph County. I spent about almost 35 years in education. I'm a superintendent of schools.
My name is Loretta Brown. I live in Morgan, Georgia, and I grew up in Randolph County. I am the state advisor for the Georgia NAACP Youth and College Division.
My name is Lewis Brooks. I live in Thomaston, Georgia, Upson County. And I've been living here my whole 89 years, except the 2 years I spent in service in Korea. In I believe it was 55 or 56, that's when they started to letting black people vote in Upson County. When I went to register to vote, it was tough. They asked me all kind of questions to try to keep me from registering. I passed the test. Once I got my voter right, I decided I wasn't going to let anything stop me from voting. Because I used to walk. You go up the street here, across the next street over there, I walk over there and walk back and vote. And I didn't miss a voting, except when they closed the poll. I'm a citizen. It's my right to vote and speak my opinion.
I saw this ad saying that there was a proposal to close 7 of the 9 precincts in Randolph County. I said, what? Then they put it in the papers that they was closing polls, costing them too much money. First of all, Randolph is a poor county. Just to give you an example of what it would mean, there's a community benevolence a little north of town. Had that precinct been closed, some of those individuals would have to go 30 miles round trip in order to vote. It would have been a terrible hardship on our poor, on our elderly, and on those who are least able to afford transportation.
I got disabled and I couldn't do no driving. I know I couldn't afford to go that far to vote. This was on a black neighborhood. It made me feel like they would close it down to keep the black people from voting, because most black people vote Democrat. They only closed one white voting place. Everybody from out here in the black side had to go clean over there to the white section to vote. We're human, and we have our rights to vote just like anybody else.
Voters in Randolph County, Georgia are outraged.
Randolph County residents expressed their concerns with the Board of Elections.
Our citizens turned out in full force.
Big problem now.
They were behind us 100%, trying to keep those polling places open.
Convenience of the voter. You all are not considering that at all.
There's no disenfranchisement for the African Americans.
I went to the meeting, find out that they were trying to close 7 of the precincts.
Got to stand up. You cannot allow this to continue.
They gave a couple of reasons, saying it would save money. The other one was that several of the polling places were not ADA compliant. The thing that was so ironic is we voted that way in May. You know, they weren't any worse in November than they were in May.
It will be impossible for rural voters without vehicles to vote on Election Day. It will be impossible for them. They will have to walk 3.5 hours just to get from one of these polling places to Cuthbert and Shellman.
We did petition to keep it open. Pressure from the residents, civil rights organization, speaking up, speaking out.
They called the meeting to order, and they only had one motion. They voted to keep them open.
The news of what was happening here in Randolph County went worldwide.
The incident that we experienced threw the spotlight on everything else that had been going on. You know, we find out that in the state of Georgia, there were over 200 other polling places had been closed.
If you move a poll 4 miles, it is the equivalent of a 20% drop in black voter turnout. That's what shutting down these polls means.
With 2 months to go, the race is heating up in Georgia.
Stacey Abrams' campaign feel they have the momentum behind them, and many of the polls we've seen so far support that.
You know, the Democrats are working hard, registering all these minority voters, and if they can do that, they can win these elections in November.
There's no law in Georgia that requires the Secretary of State to process voter registration forms on a particular timeline.
Kemp withheld putting the names of thousands on the voter registration list until after the election.
80% were African Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans.
This is Fulton County. Linda Marshall is my name. Most of my professional career has been in public service of one kind or another, as a teacher, as a government worker. I moved here in August of this year, but because of my emphasis on always being registered and always having the ability to vote, I did that almost immediately when I got here. Of course, I also knew the importance of the upcoming election, and I wanted to be a part of that history. It got closer and closer and closer to the election, and I was getting a little bit concerned, so I called the Secretary of State's office. My name is not on the roll. They can't tell me where it is. So all of that paperwork that I sent in, I don't know where it is. I'm 65, and for the first time, I did not get a chance to vote in a very close election of historic importance and proportion. Welcome to Georgia.
The midterm election in Georgia is only 29 days away.
Civil rights leaders say Kemp is illegally removing people from Georgia's voters list.
Republican Brian Kemp has already gotten the backing of our current president.
Thousands are purged from Georgia's voting rolls.
Purged from Georgia's voting rolls. 890,000. They had no idea they could vote.
Battle is brewing over who's been removed from voter.
There has been instance after instance of unlawful voter purging. States are removing voters, many of whom have actually been found to have been eligible but were unlawfully removed from the rolls.
I received the purge notice. So I open it up and I read the first sentence. I, along with 380,000 Georgians, received the same notice.
That's an especially pernicious way to prevent people from voting, because once you register to vote, you would think that you should be able to remain on the rolls. And once you're removed from the rolls, you cannot vote.
I went out and got the mail, and there were 2 letters in there. They looked official. You're hereby notified that the City of Thunderbolt has challenged your right to vote. The City of Thunderbolt states that you no longer reside within the municipality. My license is valid, my address is valid, I own this home. Why are you questioning my right to vote?
You know, the purges, they've been going on for decades, maybe over a century in this state.
If you haven't voted in the last few elections, they'll purge you as if you must not be in the state anymore. If you move within the same county, they'll purge you, assuming you're not living in Georgia anymore. If you don't return a postcard from the Secretary of State, they'll purge you, because to them it means you're not a resident at this address. All of these tactics specifically and disproportionately target people of color, poor people, the elderly, all of whom tend to vote for Democrats.
Brian Kemp is notorious for erasing the polls and purging people right before the election deadline.
You have a candidate at the top of the ticket who is responsible for maintaining the integrity of the election.
He needed to have his hands on the levers.
You have an umpire who is also playing in the game.
Less than 20 days away from the midterms now.
The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
Literally is a dead heat.
This governor's race is already one for the history books, but it's also seeing record numbers of requests for absentee ballots, especially from African-American voters.
At a time where we're seeing roughly almost half of the people who've turned in an absentee ballot are people of color, that's a really, really good sign for Stacey Abrams.
We caught them off guard by running such a large-scale program and mailed 1.6 million African Americans an absentee ballot application.
In this midterm election, the absentee ballot requests are even outperforming presidential years. So that is startling and eye-popping and something that we need to dig in on to see what's going on there.
My name is Norman Broderick. I'm in Powder Springs, Georgia, Cobb County. I've did 24 years in the military. deployed to Iraq twice, Bosnia, Saudi Arabia. I voted absentee before when I was deployed. When I was in Iraq the first time, I voted absentee, and when I was in Iraq the second time, I voted absentee. The absentee ballot is a very important tool that exists to allow people, not only just the military, but anybody who happens to be away from their voting station, to be able to cast their vote.
My name is Peggy Shu. I'm from Johns Creek, Georgia. I left Georgia for DC in the beginning of October, and before I left, I mailed out my absentee ballot application so that our registrar would send an absentee ballot to my new DC address.
I work at a U.S. Army Central, which is located at Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina. I'm away from home during the week. I knew I wasn't going to be able to get back to Georgia to vote. I could only do this absentee. I filled out everything I was supposed to fill out. I sent their documents in. I got confirmation that it was received. And to my surprise, I did not receive my absentee ballot.
I checked my mailbox every day. It was like nearing the end of the month. And so I started calling the voter protection hotline. I called my registrar. I sent emails, and it was really getting close to the election date. And I never received my ballot. The election day came and went, and I wasn't able to vote in the end.
When I contacted my wife and asked her about it, I think it was a couple of days before the election, it came here. And I tried contacting the Georgia Elections Board. I was told they did receive my absentee ballot request. Everything was filled out correctly, but that they mailed it to the wrong address. She admitted that yes, they did mess up, it was their fault, but there was nothing I could do about it. It's too late, it's over with, and my vote will not be counted during this election.
It was probably one of the most frustrating things I've ever experienced. After having spent, my entire college career very invested in the political process, it was, I don't know, like a punch to the gut.
It still pisses me off to this day. Being in Baghdad, voting absentee was easier than being 4 hours away trying to vote absentee in South Carolina.
I took to Facebook, and like the millennial activist that I am, I recounted my experience in a Facebook post. I wrote, "This is what happened. I wasn't able to vote, and if you had a similar experience, let me know." And my friend from high school, she reached out to me and she said, "I also had struggles trying to get my ballot in, voting absentee."
So I submitted an absentee ballot. It came 2 days right before Election Day.
Over the course of 48 hours, we had 40 people. So many people in our immediate Facebook circle knew somebody who had a similar experience to us.
People have requested it like far in advance. Some people just didn't get their vote in.
That was when we really realized that this was not an isolated incident. It was a much bigger issue and a much more deeper rooted sort of phenomenon that was going on statewide.
I did speak with the Board of Elections, and he just dismissed it as like a hiccup. And he's like, "Oh, like, no, you don't really know what you're talking about." 40 cases not really a hiccup. It's more of like a wake-up call.
Today, we've worked to get answers about the claim that thousands of voters never got the absentee ballots they requested.
Tuesday morning, Election Day.
The race between Abrams and Kemp is literally neck and neck.
Their fate is now in the hands of voters.
The day is finally upon us.
The midterm elections are happening.
Voters head to the polls in one of the most intensely fought midterm elections.
The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
I live in the South. I'm always worried about Election Day.
Have a great morning and go vote.
Oh yeah, gotta go vote today.
Voting started here in Georgia this morning, and if you think hitting the polls early will keep you from getting stuck on long lines, think again.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
I've never seen one.
The line hasn't moved in over an hour. The line is running out.
I really thought I was going to be able to run in and run out like I usually do.
The first thing I saw was just people everywhere. So we stood there for a while without moving. And then we would inch up. And then we wouldn't move. We had a lot of people with children there, pregnant mothers, elderly people. Some people have medical issues.
I took my son to school that morning, and then I went to vote at Ferguson Elementary, where I vote every election. The line just keeps getting longer. The line was so long, through the school and wrapped around the building. The lines was crazy everywhere, all over the county. It was real long. I was in line for 2 hours. I got to the door, that's when they was checking your ID before you go in, and she couldn't find my name. She directed me to go downtown Gwinnett, and I was like, I'm not gonna vote. And it was this older lady, she came over and she like held my hand and was like, please go do it. We need this. And I looked in her eyes and said, I will.
About 8 or 9, we started getting the calls about the long lines.
Long lines at the polling stations lead to low voter turnout. The research is just crystal clear on that.
Everyone in the world knew we were going to vote today. And in my neighborhood, there are no power cords. All these dedicated people waiting to vote. This is what we call voter suppression.
People are like upset and angry. I started calling the Secretary of State's office. I was either hung up on, placed on hold. They want people to go home and not vote. I ain't going nowhere. I'm gonna be right here.
The reason they sent me from Ferguson to the downtown Gwinnett was for the provisional vote. So I drove 25 minutes, and then when I got there, it was crowded in there. I waited 45 minutes to find out that's not where I needed to be. She told me that this was the wrong place and that I can go back to Ferguson. I had to call back and redo my schedule. So now, the voting not only cut on my time, cut on my money.
When we went in, filled out all the paperwork, had the ID, took it up to the lady. I had mine in my hand. One hand had hers in the other, because she's legally blind. So we go give it to the lady, and she goes to scan Barbara's ID. Wow. So she looked up at Barbara. She said, well, Miss Barbara, when was the last time you voted? My sister got strong. I've been voting since I was 18 years old, and I'm 82.
I was disappointed.
She was a little upset. My girl wanted to vote, and they were trying to keep her from voting.
Since I became a citizen, I have not missed an election. I showed up, and a very nice lady, she looked at my ID and said, no, you're not registered. And I said, no, wait a second. Here's my registration card, and showed them that I was registered. And they said, yeah, but your name is Del Rio with a space, but your voter ID says Del Rio one word, and therefore it doesn't match. In the voter registration, my name shows as Del Rio with a space. My ID is Del Rio, no space. That was a non-match. I said, this is not legal and I need to be allowed to vote. After much discussion, they said to me, this time we'll allow you to vote, but it's a little bit like they're doing me a favor. The right to vote should be something that we should make easier rather than more difficult.
Latinos and Asian Americans are 6 times more likely than white Georgians to be cut from the voter rolls because of exact match, and Black Americans are 8 times more likely to be cut because of exact match.
I have voted in every election, and all of a sudden I'm not there.
Controversy surrounds the state's exact match law that put the registrations of 53,000 voters, most of them African Americans, on hold because of discrepancies in the way their names are spelled in state databases.
People of color have names that are a little bit less typical, and that's where the errors are at their highest. Brian Kemp knows this.
A group of students will not have their voices heard at the polls, at least not in Georgia.
They're turning a bunch of students away over here.
We're showing up here and at the Booker T. Washington location, and their names were not on the actual roll.
The students was being turned away. I talked to over 50 students that morning.
First, they told me I was at the wrong polling station.
They said you didn't get registered. I was like, what do you mean?
And there was only about like
4 voting ballot booths.
They didn't process my registration didn't go through. I walked back to my dorm and said, I guess I just won't vote.
Just before I went to vote, I had been in an African American history class where we were actually talking about voter suppression, about what was it like for people that were going to vote. I filled out a little slip of paper, gave it to the poll workers. They looked up at me and they said, it's coming up in our system as though you're not a citizen of the United States. I just sort of looked at them like they had 2 heads. Like, I'm sorry, I was born in New York, what?
When I got to the front of the line, they informed me that I was registered to vote, but not in Dougherty County. They were telling me that I was registered back home in Winter Robins, where I was from, and I've never voted there. I've never even been registered there.
The thing was that I had brought proof that I was a U.S. citizen. I had with me my driver's license, my passport card, and my Emory student ID, but they would not look at the passport card whatsoever to prove that I was a citizen. I walked out crying. What I learned in history class just hours before, this happened to me in 2018.
I had been through and participated in voter registration drive on campus, within the community. It was just like, wow, after all of this, I'm not gonna be able to vote myself.
Like when I was growing up, voting was a thing. It was an event. So little me is trailing behind my parents watching them vote.
My parents would take me to the voting polls every time when I was little. I would go in and I would help them fill out the bubbles.
I get a chance to vote, and then you get there and the experience is just terrible, and you have to call your mom and be like, why is this so hard? You never told me it would be this hard.
This was huge for us because Stacey Abrams was actually a Spelman alum. History would have been made, and it would have been made by my Spelman sister.
If there is no one who gets to 50% tonight, Robin, there will be a runoff in December.
We'll find out as the day and evening goes on.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Are they letting you know? Are you really kidding me?
Old people who can't vote, there's young people who can't vote, there's people in every county who can't vote. It just created this intense fog of confusion across the state.
Been here for 3 hours, 4 or 5 hour wait.
5 hours.
This is way, way too long for us to stay and vote.
How long have you waited in line here?
About 3.5 hours.
Have you decided you can't stand it? You can't take it anymore? Are you going to go home?
I'm hurting. I'll be back. I got to go take some medicine.
It was really good. The lines weren't too long and everyone was super helpful.
We don't hardly ever have to wait here. It's always a pleasant experience up here.
If you have a fixed resource, an easy way to suppress the vote is to just make that resource unavailable to the people who you don't want to vote. And that's exactly what happened in the 2018 election here in the state of Georgia. In places like North Fulton County, which are wealthy, there were more machines than anyone could ever use. In black neighborhoods, there were a quarter of the number of machines that were needed to service the population.
Lots of people left without voting.
It was people just dropping off when it became 2 hours, 3 hours. 4th hour is very heartbreaking.
All it takes is a little walking away at 159 counties to influence an election. A little here, a little there, and then in a race like this, which was so close, there you go.
All night on Twitter, a trending topic, #StayInLine.
I had to go and pick my son up. He had to be picked up before 6. I picked my son up and he went with me and sat in the car. And then I went back to Ferguson Elementary. And by this time, the evening crowd is there and the line has tripled. And I was like, oh, there is no way. Just for my one vote, it took me like 6 hours. And I wanted to give up because I promised that elderly lady outside that I would do it.
5 hours, so about 5 hours took me to vote. It sucks the life out of you.
I'd been in people's homes, I'd been in their neighborhoods, I'd held their hands. And so to get to election night and to start hearing more and more stories of voter suppression, to hear more and more from people who were told that they couldn't vote or who were turned away or had to give up because of 4-hour lines, that broke my heart.
Republican Brian Kemp holds a narrow lead over Democrat Stacey Abrams.
Tens of thousands of ballots left to be counted in this election. They were counting provisional ballots for hours.
Provisional ballots are basically placebos. They're being given to voters to kind of shut them up, make them go away.
The next day, I was so excited because they were saying that it was a close race. I was like, oh, let me make sure that my vote count. So I called the number that was on the paper that I got from the voting poll. And she go, oh no, they counting every vote. You don't need to call. I called my mom to double check. My mom worked for the poll for 20 some years. And she said, no, that's not true. You call back to make sure the vote count. And someone else says to the phone, and I got the same thing. No, you don't need to call back. We counting all the votes.
We just started discovering so many people voting provisionally. We realized, oh, you voted provisionally, so you might have to come back here the next day and show your ID. Is that something you know? And they're like, no, I already voted. Like, I'm good.
But you have to come back within 3 days with the documentation to prove you are who you say you are. When you have a large working class population that has to punch a clock, that's really tough. You've lost pay from work trying to vote. That's a poll tax.
Hi, this is Christine from Gwinnett County Elections.
I wanted to confirm if my vote was counted or not.
All right, what is your last name?
Kimball.
Let's see. There was no participation.
So does that...
You weren't given credit for voting.
My vote was not counted.
It looks like it on election day, yes, ma'am.
No, I thank you. Goodbye.
Last night, my opponent ended her campaign. The election is over, and I'm honored to be Georgia's governor-elect.
I acknowledge that former Secretary of State Brian Kemp will be certified as the victor in the 2018 gubernatorial election. But to watch an elected official baldly pin his hopes for election on the suppression of the people's democratic right to vote has been appalling. This is not a speech of concession. Because concession means to acknowledge an action is right, true, or proper. As a woman of conscience and faith, I cannot concede that.
The voter suppression that we saw in Georgia for the 2018 election between Kemp and Abrams was really just a precursor to the voter suppression laws that we're now seeing across the country.
In 2021, there have been 19 states that have passed over 34 laws to restrict access to the ballot.
They're all based on the same big lie of voter fraud that Donald Trump has been pushing. The most notable ones are the swing states.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed new voting reform legislation into law. The law includes limits on drop boxes and changes to how people sign up for vote by mail.
I've been voting by mail since I moved to Florida. We don't all work 9-to-5 jobs, so it's really nice to be able to vote by mail. I missed out on a pivotal city council race last year because I did not realize that I had been removed from vote by mail and I did not get any notification. Unfortunately, I will have to re-enroll every cycle now after each election is over. Your average voter is not going to remember to re-enroll every single year. It makes me quite angry and supremely frustrated.
What it does is move the goalpost yet again in a long line or a game of voter suppression that has been taking place in Florida for so many years.
The Republican-backed election reform bill is headed to Governor Greg Abbott's desk. The bill bans 24-hour voting and drive-through voting.
I loved the drive-through voting experience.
It was safe, it was secure, it was convenient, and very efficient. You vote from the comfort of your car. I drove others to cast their ballot, and for some, it was the very first time ever. And had it not been for drive-through voting, they probably would have never voted. After the 2020 election, the Texas legislature passed bills to ban drive-through voting, and that is what we're dealing with here in Texas. They want voting to be as difficult as possible, so you won't do it.
A major Supreme Court decision on voting rights. The conservative majority upholding 2 Arizona voting restrictions that opponents claim would unfairly result in racial discrimination.
One criminalizes the collection of ballots by third parties. The other requires election officials to throw out ballots cast at the wrong precinct.
I have about 300 family members. The Felix family is pretty large here in Yuma. For some of us who live down in the counties, that would be about anywhere from 30 to 100 miles away from the nearest polling place. Some of my family members are disabled. Some of them cannot drive miles away. Some, don't have access to, vehicles. My family has voted the last couple of years with people collecting ballots. Somebody goes to your door, collects your ballot, and collects them, ships them off to whatever polling location there is. With the new restrictions on collecting ballots, that is going to restrict almost hundreds of my family. It's silencing the votes of many, many rural Arizona people.
This morning, Georgia's governor has signed a controversial bill rewriting the state's election rules. It will limit absentee ballots in early voting, restrict ballot drop boxes, and impose new voter ID requirements.
The last couple of elections, I did mail-in voting as well as drop box voting. The new voting laws in Georgia restricting drop boxes, restricting mail-in voting is very repressive. I have multiple health issues, as do many other people. This would severely restrict my ability to vote. I don't know how long I can stand in line, to be honest, so I will be involved in efforts to challenge that.
If 2021 was the year of rampant voter suppression by Republican legislatures, 2022 is the year of voter subversion.
Election subversion actually tries to prevent the mechanics of elections happening. And it could be anything from partisan poll watchers coming in and intimidating someone from their participation at the polls. And it could also be very much of identifying ideologues to start viewing those election officials.
Both Democrats and Republicans who defended the integrity of the 2020 election have been purged from their position. 163 Republicans who've amplified the big lie are running for statewide positions with authority over elections. This is akin to giving a robber a key to the bank.
I call it election sabotage, because really that is what these laws are designed for. They're designed to allow partisan officials to sabotage valid election results.
This insurrection has now taken root in our states. If the response to increased participation by communities of color, by young people, by women is to restrict their access and impede their participation, our democracy is not safe, it is not sound, and it is not resilient.
We are not going to let them take from us what our grandparents and parents fought and suffered and died to give us in the first place.
We had record turnout in the United States of America in 2020, and that tells me that people are awake. They understand what's happening. They're going to participate, and they're going to fight for their right to participate.
We're in the eye of the storm, and we need every single American to cut up with that same amount of energy that we did in 2018 and 2020.
Keep yourself educated about what's going on in your state with any voter suppression or election sabotage laws that have been passed. Educate your friends and family, your coworkers, your community. Make sure that everyone knows what's going on.
We have to put pressure on those that we've elected. It doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or Republican. We should be burning their phone lines up right now around voting rights.
Register people to vote. Register your friends, your family. Talk to everyone. Become the vote captain of your household.
Join a local organization in your community.
Get involved locally.
Become a poll worker. Get trained.
If you don't like something, you can either volunteer or run for office.
We can't fight these issues alone. We have to be organized and we have to be engaged.
What's at stake is electing people who look like us. What's at stake is getting policy passed that will help protect us from these types of laws in the future.
Any voter suppression law is not just about black people, it is about America itself. On my mother's dying bed at 92 years old, former sharecropper, her last words were, "Do not let them take our votes away from us."
We've got to make democracy together.
From sea to shining sea.
Hello again, everyone. Hello and welcome back from the film. Victoria Williams. I am your host for our panel discussion this evening. And like one of the people who appeared in the film, I am a naturalized U.S. citizen. I'm originally from Germany and am a Mischling-Kinder from that generation who could have grown up in an orphanage, but thank God I didn't. My parents adopted me. And in 2002, I became a U.S. citizen and have voted in that election and every one since. As a mom, I've ensured that my 3 adult children all were registered to vote so that when they turned 18, they too would vote, and all have voted in every election since that. They're currently 22, 24, and 26 and about to age up a year. So I am passionate about the notice that I am a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, and I have the pleasure of introducing our panel for tonight's question. So again, welcome back. We have tonight with us Gabriela Caceres Kelly. She is our Pima County recorder, and she took office in January of 2021. She leads an office that oversees voter registration, early voting, and document recording for the county. She is a proud union dues paying former Red for Education public school educator and community organizer. She's one of only 4 women who co founded the Indivisible Tohono, a grassroots community organization that provides opportunities for the education and civic engagement for members of her tribe, the Tohono O'odham Nation. She was inspired to run for office herself after encountering many systemic barriers that prevented her people from simply getting registered to vote. She lives with her husband Ryan and their 2 children who are now voting ages themselves. And she is the first Native American woman to hold an elected Pima County office and one of only 4 Native Americans to ever hold a countywide office in Arizona. Also joining us is the Honorable Reginald Boulding. He is our Arizona House Democratic leader and co founder of the Arizona Coalition for Change. He began his work in the movement in an unconventional way. He is a first generation college graduate and he turned down a full ride scholarship to become a special education teacher in South Phoenix. Witnessing an educational system that systemically disadvantaged his students of color and those living in the lower income communities, he used his passion for service to run for office for a seat in the Arizona State House of Representatives because he wanted to create policies that would create greater access and opportunities for the underserved in his community. In 2016, he and his wife, whom I've known since she was knee high to a grasshopper, Miss Simone Boulding, launched the Arizona Coalition for Change. In 2016, this Arizona Coalition for Change was launched, and it is a Black-led organization working to build independent political power for the new American majority communities. They want to hold elected leaders accountable and advocate for our nation's most pressing issues. Since 2016, AZC4C, Arizona Coalition for Change, has worked on elections and ballot measures that include increasing the minimum wage, providing $300 million in school funding, and fighting for voter justice to ensure free and fair elections. And as we mentioned free and fair elections, I want to introduce our last panelist, Mr. Avery Zola. He is the manager for the Arizona Citizens Clean Elections Commission. He graduated from Arizona State University. We won't hold that against him. In 2018 with a degree in political science. And he also, at that time, interned with the Secretary of State's office under Secretary Michelle Regan. In 2021, Avery graduated with his master's degree, congratulations, in public administration from the Watts College of Public Service and Community Solutions. Avery's background is in campaign management, civic engagement, voter education, and he is also a published writer and an Air Force veteran. Thank you so much for your service, Avery. So let's just jump right into things here. I want to pick up the discussion on the issues discussed for Arizona and the voter suppression bills in this legislative session. So I'm going to first turn to you, Reginald, with some questions because we have heard that there were over 100 Arizona voter suppression bills introduced into the legislature. Can you tell us the status of some of those bills, what we can do, and if any of them have become law other than the 2 that were mentioned in the film?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you all for having me. I'm really excited about this panel, fellow panelists. Good seeing you all. I'm joining you all from my car right now. I'm just finishing another event down in Pima County. But yeah, so over this year, we've seen over 100 voter suppression, voter restriction bills introduced. So far, 10 of those bills have actually went through the system, have been voted on. 7 of them have been signed into law by the governor. 1 has been vetoed. But out of those 7, 4 of them actually had bipartisan support. So while you have this big Stop the Steal movement, this big election conspiracy theory movement, in large part because of community organizations, we've been able to really rally the base and call attention to these election deniers who are looking to make it more difficult here in Arizona for people to actually have the freedom to vote. We've seen bills introduced that would go as far as actually taking away individuals' right to vote by mail. And here in Arizona, we've been voting by mail for over 30 years. Arizona was literally, first in the nation to start our vote by mail system, and 90% of Arizonans choose to do that. We've seen bills that would decide, again, that would ensure that all of our elections are only hand counted. But a lot of these bills that we saw were to mobilize a base of conspiracy theorists who are willing to tear down our elections at any cost possible. It's no longer about how do I create an election system that works. It's become about how do I ensure my team wins. And we just know that's not how we can operate.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that answer. Would anyone else like to weigh in on the voter election suppression bills that have passed so far? Gabriela?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, skugtash anya nyapchugi Gabriela Cáceres Kelly, bisan mo ochkuk amjud, anya would kapima chukshan ohandam. So hello everybody. My name is Gabriela Cáceres Kelly. I'm from the communities of Bisan and Cook, which are located on the Tohono Nation, which is right here in beautiful Pima County, where I am the elected county recorder. I got involved specifically because I was concerned about those voter suppression tactics that we were seeing, or just maybe an oversight of voter registration availability in Native communities. And some of the bills that have been passed, some of the bills that have been introduced in this legislative cycle and the previous cycle. Last cycle, we saw about 180, I think, by the time everything, everything went through the budget, it was 180. This cycle, we saw 145 within the first 2 weeks. And so it was bananas. And I think part of it is the overwhelming of the system. It's so difficult to be able to read 145 pieces of legislation, to look at everything, analyze things, see how much it's going to cost, see what the impact is on your office. And to do that, there are 15 counties here in Arizona. And so for each of those offices to have to take the time, that's literally taking time away from our everyday tasks, which have to do with voter list maintenance and making sure that people's names are where they should be on those rolls. And so there's been a lot that has been directed at Native American communities. One of the bills that is requiring videos on ballot drop locations, or unstaffed ballot drop-off locations, that makes the most impact in like a Native community that would most likely be in a rural location. Arizona has 20
infrastructure
nations. Yeah, and we lack the infrastructure. And so we're seeing a ton of it, and it's very overwhelming and disheartening.
Avery, did you want to weigh in, or do we want to go to the next question? I can pose it to you.
Yeah, we can go to the next question.
Oh, awesome. So where can Arizona voters go to check on their registration status, and what can they do to ensure that they maintain that permanent early voter list status with regards to voting?
Yeah. Well, first thing they can do is if they're in Maricopa County, they can go to beballotready.vote, and there they can check their registration. It even tell you like the past elections that you voted in. So if you voted a provision, you can actually go check and see if your vote has counted. For the state, you can go to arizona.vote. It's a website by the Secretary of State, and we'll also have similar information. But you can find out if your vote is counted. You can find out your registration history and look at your information to make sure your address is correct, make sure your correct political party has been chosen, make sure your name is correct, all those things that could be a hiccup, in the voting process.
And I know we have a lot of people who are joining us online. I, in the past, have had the opportunity to work on other campaigns out of state. What can people who live outside of Arizona do to support our efforts here to ensure that our elections are still fair?
Yeah, I can keep on with this. What I would say is to donate. People out of state, we have races in state that have national implications, like our Congress and things like that. So I would say people out of state can donate to those campaigns, or they could also donate to organizations, grassroots organizations that do a lot of the work, getting people registered and getting people informed.
So, Reggie, as we kind of segue to you for that, with Arizona Coalition for Change, what kinds of things are you guys doing to ensure that we can maintain our places on the rolls for our upcoming elections?
You know, the one of the most important things that we all have to do is make sure that we're talking about voting in a continuum, not like it's just a one day process, right? Because we want people to think about voting in the term of civic engagement. So for us, we try not to just focus on voter registration. We want to also make sure that there's voter education and there's also voter advocacy. Because the reality is when you talk to a lot of people in the community, they say, you know, I'm not political. And what they're really saying is I'm not partisan. I don't want to get involved in the partisan bickering that I hear every single day. But what we say, everything is political. So it's important for you to have a voice. And in order for you to have that voice, you first have to get in the game. And part of getting in the game is getting registered to vote. So for us, we believe that it's extremely important that one, people understand what issues are at play. So if you care about your freedom to choose, you know, and we've seen the draft Roe opinion, state lawmakers, they're going to have an ability to actually play a significant role on women's reproductive health and what that looks like in the future. If you care about our public education system, or you know, you're going to have the ability to actually make sure that you are influencing folks who are at the state legislature, those who are on school boards. That's important. If you care about our environment, if you care about our elections, if you care about our healthcare, all of those things matter. And in order for you to have an active voice, not only do you have to vote, you have to hold these elected leaders accountable, because the reality is during the election season, people are going to tell you whatever they think you want to hear. But organizations like the Arizona Coalition for Change, we want you to not only vote, but we also want you to hold folks accountable for the things that they said they were going to do when they said they were going to do it.
That is awesome, because in our household, we discuss politics and we don't always agree on certain principles or platforms. And in my household, you know, some of us are registered Democrats, some are registered Republicans, independents, and we have those discussions. But it truly is about educating yourself on knowing not just who's running for office, but what are some of the ballot measures that are important to your community too. So I have a question for you, Gabriela. When it comes to the nation, what kinds of efforts do you think we can help with to try to increase the engagement, especially among young people, when I know they can be disheartened sometimes?
Wow. I think really what I think is really helpful is demystifying the process as a whole. I think one of the things that really was striking for me, and when I first got involved in just voter registration, I was really surprised by the number of people who were confused when I asked at a tribal community college, are you registered to vote? Because in that community, that actually had two meanings: whether or not they could vote in the local, state, and federal elections, or for tribal elections. And those are two different voter registration processes. So it required a civics lesson for every single person that I was talking to, because they needed to know the difference. And nobody had ever had a conversation about the difference between those two acts. So I think demystifying the process and simplifying it for people, letting them know what they can expect when they show up or what they should have to help them reduce the opportunity for embarrassment. You know, for a lot of people, you know, we talk about this long legacy of voter registration, but because of voter suppression in our country, we know that not everybody is starting from the same starting line.
Exactly.
And so that makes a lot of people, you know, we've disenfranchised not just, you know, one or two members of a household, but whole households, whole neighborhoods, whole communities. And so having to have somebody come and be in that community and do something different that they've never done before, that nobody knows, you know, what to do.
They don't have that experience. Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. So we need to demystify it. We need to talk about it. We need to reach out to even like, are you texting your group chat? Are you who are you checking in on, and asking them whether or not they're registered or what their plan is or how they're going to do it. One of the things hearing about the college students and our military voters who didn't receive their absentee ballots, a lot of times people are like, well, who qualifies for absentee? Like, do I have to come up with a really good excuse? Here in Arizona, more than 80% of voters are signed up for the active early voting list. It used to be called the permanent early voting list.
But it's not permanent any longer. We know. It's active. You better vote in those elections or they will remove you.
Right.
Yes.
But it's important for people to know that they can not only vote anywhere in the state, but they can actually vote anywhere in the country or even overseas.
And early. That's the great thing. They can vote early, right?
We even have UOCAVA voters, so overseas voters, military or otherwise, who can vote by email. There are different ways. They just need to make sure that they know what their options are. And it's really surprising to hear how many people just simply don't know what their options are. So reach out to your community.
I love that question you asked. What's your plan for voting, right? So if you have an obstacle that you have to overcome, what are you going to do? If your signature doesn't match and they reject your ballot because it doesn't match your driver's license, do you know where to go to have that remedy, that kind of thing? So that's an awesome question. I know we have comments from the audience. I would also encourage any questions if anyone has questions. One thing I'll ask just of anyone again, with regards to the misinformation, that we know that's going to continue to be spread out there, especially here in Arizona, where we are a swing state. Where can voters go to ensure that they've got accurate information about the elections? Again, as we were saying, nonpartisan information. Are there organizations that you would recommend? Is it going to be, again, the state Secretary of State's page? Where would you suggest that we go if we want to make that plan and get the information that we need to be educated ahead of the elections?
I can tell. Are you?
I would like to say, if you're in Pima County, go to your county recorder's website because we're going to have that information. And we have been working really hard with the elections department within our county. Some of them are together, some of them are separate. It just depends on the county. But most for us, we're always reminding each other, voters aren't going to know the difference. So we try to have that information available on our website. We're trying to simplify. We're trying to make it accessible in not legal language. And yeah, we encourage people to start to get to know who are their trusted individuals in their lives. Like for example, my sister is always calling me to be like, who should I vote for? What are your thoughts on this person? Give me the tea. And I'm her trusted source of information because I pay attention. So it doesn't always have to be an organization. It could be just your involved friend. Listen and talk to them about what that is. But Arizona clean elections, of course.
No, Avery.
Right? And there's so many good organizations who are doing the work. And what I always encourage people to do is look to an organization that shares your values. So
that was excellent. And all I was going to add is, yes, I was going to plug clean elections, but another thing that I like to tell voters is to start with government institutions as your trusted source, because you're going to get factual dates and deadlines. Clean elections, we send out a voter education guide for the primary and for the general election. It should be out the last week of June. Early voting starts July 6th, so you have 27 days to get informed, to prepare for the election, and then to vote. And you don't have to vote on election day. In Arizona, we have a few ways you can vote. You can vote early by mail. You can vote early in person. Just remember, if you do vote in person, you have to have your ID with you.
Mm-hmm. And bring a mask just in case. You
might want to bring a mask. Yeah.
Just in case. All right. So Representative Bolden, there is a question that is addressing the ballot imaging issue. Can you address that that concern that people have over the ballot imaging?
Yeah. So this past legislative session, there was a individual who many of us know as an election denier, an individual by the name of Mark Fincham, who was part of the January 6th insurrection, who has been part of what we would consider, many people would consider him a champion for the anti-democracy movement, introduced a bill that would require ballot imaging to allow folks to place their ballots online. So we'll require the counties to put ballots online. He wrote a bill in the legislation. The bill has not made it to the House floor. It has not made it to the Senate. It's not been passed. It's one that won't move this year. The reality is right now people aren't asking for their ballots to be put online. That's just not the priority for people here in Arizona. What I am hearing people say is that they want to make sure that their freedom to vote is protected. What I'm also hearing people say is they want to make sure that when they sign up for something like the permanent early voting list, that is permanent. When they engage in that contract with the state, is not something that goes back. The state's not going back on that, like we saw with the Senate Bill 1485 introduced last year that could purge 150,000 people. There's some states across the country that allow for ballot imaging to be placed online, but here in Arizona, that's not what we've been hearing an overwhelming a grassroots groundswell for. And in this bill in particular, that Mr. Fincham tried to introduce, it set up a system that could have been really tenable for many county recorders, especially for those that have vote centers. That bill would have actually required that all of our ballots are placed by precinct, and then they're uploaded by precinct online with their ballot images, which would have created a very difficult situation for our county recorders. And it had a time limit specifically when those had to be up. So that is something that, really right now, not a top priority for Arizona.
Well, it's an undue burden, it sounds like, from a financial and time aspect. But then again, some of us want our votes to be our private votes. We don't need everybody in the world to know how we voted down the line for judges or different things that are up for legislation. So thank you, guys. I will send this next question to Gabriela. With the technology that we have today, someone asked, why aren't we able to cast our votes online as easily as we process our government benefits or unemployment, that kind of thing? That would be, again, private information.
I think there's a couple of, this is a really great question. I get this a lot. Because for select groups of people, like, for example, our uniformed overseas voters, they can digitally send us an image of their ballot and we can process that. However, we in Pima County have to do that by email. And we don't have an infrastructure set up so that the 625,000 voters that are in Pima County, which is the second largest county, right behind Maricopa County that, has 2 million voters or so, to be able to handle that type of system. So number one, there's a concern about paper ballots and making sure that we have access to paper ballots so that no one is able to digitally manipulate them. That's a concern. Number two is a cost in having that infrastructure. That's why any recorder, any clerk, any Secretary of State is pushing for federal funding for voting. We simply don't have the infrastructure available for us to be able to do something like that at this time. So.
Thank you. There was a question, and I know people are asking this because they've seen it from other states where there were states that were trying to make it illegal to give water to people who were waiting in long lines. In Arizona, we know that when elections come, then they're going to be those long lines and it's going to be hot. So no, it is not illegal to hand out water at polling stations as they wait in line. But there are some other things we want to address as well. So this next question is, could people stand in line as proxies for people who are being suppressed so they could hold their place if they wanted to go run an errand, they needed to go pick up their kids, if they want to go use the bathroom, and then have that person take their place back in line? Is that something that can happen?
Ooh, that's a really tough question. Number one, we need to make sure that we don't have lines that are that long. Part of and we're not seeing these lines like there's like the film really focused on Georgia and Georgia's long lines, and Maricopa County had when they first switched from polling locations to vote centers a number of years ago. But the goal for all elections officials is to create shorter lines so that that type of situation isn't an issue where people are waiting, that people need pizza, people need water, where people need proxies. That is a symptom of a failed election system. And so right now, if you have to physically be in line in person by 7 p.m., and I really hope that there isn't an opportunity or there isn't a need to have a proxy. There is no legislation on the lines itself. There are practices, but not specific laws that
100%.
dictate that if you're in line at 7, you can vote.
Yeah. I think the question does, though, speak to some of, like I said, the confusion or a lack of trust in knowing what the processes are. Can any one of you guys address the concern that people have about restoring trust in our electoral process here in Arizona? What is being done by elected officials to do that? And it looks like we lost Reginald too. So I don't know if Roy Tatum, who is the political director for Arizona Coalition for Change, wants to join us on the panel. But again, either of you guys can, if you can handle that question, that is just something I know that is on the hearts and minds of others.
I just didn't want to hog the camera here, but no. So one of the things about Arizona is, there are 15 counties, there are 15 county recorders, there are 15 elected county recorders, there are 15 elections directors, and some play double duty. But for the most part in Arizona, whether or not there's actually more Republican recorders in Arizona than there are Democrat. There's 9, and there's 1 independent, and there's 5 Democrats. But as a whole, every single one of them has expressed their concern for voter access. And I think the recorders are all on board. We want to expand and have people be more able to register to vote and know when they're registered and have that be very transparent. Obviously, the Secretary of State has been very positive and wants to expand voting also. Where we're starting to see this voter suppression is from the legislature, the people making and drawing up the laws. That's where we see a wildly different expectation from it's really alarming. It's alarming to us. It's alarming to us as a recorders association. The governor has not been standing up for voting rights. It's all a political push to try to disenfranchise voters. It's very clear. I'm very concerned for our upcoming election in 2022 because there are a ton of elections deniers who are raising gobs and gobs of money, who are openly talking about fraudulent voting, even though there has been no evidence of this. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Avery, can you tell us more about your organization? And
Yeah.
if you can, share a little bit about the Request to Speak platform, because I know that's something that too many of us don't get involved with, so that we can learn more about what's going on in this legislature.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, Arizona Citizens Clean Elections Commission is a government agency. We're nonpartisan. We were established in 1998 via a voter initiative. We handle voter education, campaign finance, and campaign enforcement. So you can you could also run clean with us, and what that means is that you forego corporate funds, interest group monies, things like that, and you get funded off of people in your community with $5 donations, basically. Yeah, we educate the entire state, and our website is, if you ever go to our website, azcleanelections.gov, it is not going to look like a normal traditional government website, and we do that because we want to make it user friendly. So some of the things we have on there is we have our voter education guide, like I mentioned, that has all 30 legislative districts for statewide and legislative offices. We're going to have that in the primary and the general. We have a voter dashboard, which is probably the tool that I most recommend and I use the most. If you go to our voter dashboard, you put in your address, it'll tell you everything you need to know about voting in your area. It'll tell you about contact information. It's a really good resource to kind of see like where you start, in your community. We're having debates. Currently, right now, we have debates in all 30 districts that have a contested election. So if you really want to know what the candidate is talking about in person, check out the debates on our YouTube channel. You can check out the past debates. Also, what else? We have, go ahead.
No, I said that's great.
Oh, yeah. And then we also have an ID at the polls quiz. So if you're not sure what kind of ID you have, you can go to our website, and actually there's a list of things that you could take. And, sometimes you could have a picture ID and, 2 pieces of mail. We sort all that out for you. So that's going to be some of the resources that we offer to voters. And we try to alleviate some of the confusion. We try to correct some of the misinformation and the disinformation. So that's why I say, voters, you should always start with a government trusted website and then go from there. But our voter education guide is a good resource for the candidates from their mouths, So that's basically what we do.
Thank you.
Oh, and the RTS.
Yes.
The RTS. Please, people of color, organizations, please go to the RTS. It's down at the Capitol, but it allows you a few minutes, sometimes a few minutes to speak on your behalf of your organization, of your community. If you can't go and speak on the RTS or you're not comfortable with that, please just sit in the audience and, and sit there and be a body so they can see that there's what the electorate looks like. So that's what I would say to that.
And for anybody wanting to Google that, that's request to speak. We got to stop talking in acronyms.
Yes, request to speak. I did say request to speak. Yes, but and I think it's also a great opportunity for you to see what bills are there and where they are in the process, and if you need to give public commentary to any of the committees that is looking at those specific bills. So I would definitely encourage anyone to register for the request to speak platform. One last question as we're getting closer to the top of the hour is a question. Here's another question. So if you feel that there is voter suppression occurring within your area, do we have a way that we can report it? Is there a hotline? Is there some kind of way that you can live court it? What kinds of suggestions would you give to people who feel like they're dealing with that unfortunate situation?
There's number one, there's a bunch of organizations that are going to, number one, report it to the government officials, to the elections officials. We have been hearing a lot of information about or accusations about fraudulent behavior in the elections, and nobody turns in any evidence. Like if you submit something, it will be investigated. That's really important. But also, it's really important for people to know that talking about fraudulent behavior weakens the integrity of the elections process.
The trust in the system.
We really need people to trust into the system. We have checks and balances. We have an elections procedures manual. We have things that we're legally required to follow. And so when people are talking about fraudulent behavior, those are things that can be, those are caught. Those are caught.
Yeah.
And they're prosecuted. They're investigated. And so for people to make these wild accusations of of things that are happening in the voting in the world, it's very frustrating because that person who is unsure of whether or not their vote is going to count, who has been disenfranchised their entire life and told that their vote doesn't matter, that person is going to be influenced and is going to feel less enthusiastic about voting. They're going to buy into the lie that their voice doesn't matter. And so we really have to be careful about the way that we talk about fraudulent behavior. If you have your vote denied, if there is some reason, number one, you insist and you get a provisional ballot, those provisional ballots have to be reviewed. We take a look at every single one. Do not leave without casting a provisional ballot if that's what you have to do. But you need to call and talk with your election officials.
So that leads me to another segue question. So like we saw in the film that in Georgia, if you cast a provisional ballot, you had to show up to your county recorder's office within 3 days with your ID to confirm who you were. Do we have any kinds of requirements like that here for Pima County or Maricopa County?
So that is that's an extreme. There's a number of different types of provisional ballots. And for the most part, if there's something like your name has always been on the ballot and it hasn't, all of a sudden it's changed and it's not there, and you show up with ID and it's clear that you should have been on the list and they give you a provisional ballot, they will mark that they've taken your ID, that they've verified who you are, and that should not require any follow-up. That should be them simply processing it, which does take an incredible amount of time. For people who show up without any identification whatsoever, clearly we need people to show up with their identification. That is a person who would have a specific provisional ballot that would require us to have follow-up. So there's differences in what those situations are. One of the really big things that Pima County has done is Pima County, we used to have polling locations and specific polling locations where if you were in the wrong polling location, even if you drove past two to get to the one that it was assigned to you, you would have to submit a provisional ballot. We were just rampant. We had the same number of provisional ballots as Maricopa County, even though they have twice the population. It was really ridiculous. And so Pima County, this upcoming cycle, we're moving to vote centers where anybody can vote at any location within our county. And we were very mindful of locations in rural areas and places where there was high populations of Latino folks or people of color, or areas where they're just simply geographically isolated. And so we are we're going to see a reduction in provisional ballots, but either way, don't let anybody ever turn you away. We do not turn people away. And if you have to make a phone call and you need to know what your rights are. And I'm so excited to hear about the Arizona Clean Elections ID tool. That's something I might consider linking on our website even. That sounds really cool. Because people need to know what their identification is when they show up. And, somebody like me, I'm a tribal member. I live here in Tucson. I remember one cycle years and years ago, I lost my driver's license right before, but I had my tribal identification card. And I had to argue with somebody about whether or not it was a valid form of identification. But because I had checked the website, I had called, I knew what my rights were, and they had to take it. And so sometimes that requires, sometimes that might just be, maybe it's a cultural difference, like we said about the names. I have a hyphenated last name. I'm a Native American woman with a tribal ID. There are people who have never met Native Americans before. We need people of color
to work those polls and voting centers. Yes.
The information that you know about your community is vital. And that's why we need people to get involved, people from our own communities to get involved, because you know what you know. It's really
So
valid.
thank you. I'm going to turn things over back to Carmen. But again, thank you all very much. We will share out the information on the Arizona Coalition for Change website. People can also go to azcleanelections.gov and to azcounties.org and arizona.vote. BeBallotReady.vote was the other particular URL. So Carmen, thank you so much. I'll turn things back over to you as our screener for the movie. Yes, no. There she is. Hey,
Yeah,
girl.
thank you all so much. You all rock. This is
Oh, I just saw your message. You didn't want to come back? Come on, I need you to wrap it up, girl. Wrap it up tight. Because people want to know how they can get their own screening of this film. It was so
wonderful.
impactful.
Yes, thank you. By all means, please go to www.fighttovote.org. Brave New Films has a 1,000 screening goal to hit. Okay, so by all means, go to www.fighttovote.org. Share the film. Share once it's available this stream, because folks may need to hear this information that they've shared. They might not have been able to join us tonight. So by all means, get out the vote, spread the word to your communities, and folks, let's turn out for these next couple elections. Have a great evening.
You guys have one more screening coming up next week, though, right?
One more screening, yes. Actually, Texas. Okay. We're going to be having Texas on next go round, and we're going to turn it over completely to Texas, so they have the complete floor to speak about their needs. So thank you all in Arizona for joining us. Thank you all for being such a great audience. Thank you all for being such a great panel, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, guys.